If you think this is about a Christmas service, you're mistaken. If you think this is about getting ready for the holidays and Thanksgiving has passed, you're mistaken. This is about It Truly Is a Wonderful Life. This is about understanding what really matters in this life. As I was preparing for this sermon this week, as I was thinking about what I wanted to say to this congregation and to those that are online, by the way, let me welcome you. It is so good to see you. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I hope that you got to spend some time with family and friends and have great food together, great table fellowship together. But I thought maybe it's a time for us to sit and really think about it truly is a wonderful life. We'll get to that clip here in just a second. But if you want to get your Bibles out, we're going to be in John chapter 10. And it's funny because Jesus is in a conversation with a bunch of people that think they have life figured out. Jesus is in a conversation with the people that think we've got it. We figured it out. And Jesus says, in just the greatest way possible, you don't have a clue. You've missed the mark. You don't really understand how to live life the way the creator of life wanted life to be lived. You've missed it. You're concerned about things that, well, the Father's not concerned about. And the things that the Father is concerned about, you've pushed away. No, this isn't anything to do about Christmas. This all has to do with perspective. How do you look at the life that we live? Now, it's interesting. We've been in a long study of the book of Revelation. And Scott Sager's done a wonderful job. He is our pulpit minister here. And he's done an incredible job of really unpacking that rich book that can be difficult if you don't have a guide. But I think it's funny that the author of that book also authors this gospel that many believe to be the most loving and compassionate gospel and more about understanding who Jesus was as a person. And I think as we look at John chapter 10, what you're going to see are the things that Jesus really cares about. So let's talk about the clip for a second. That, of course, comes from It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. It's an American classic. I hope all of you will watch it sometime within the next month with your family because I do think it gives you a perspective. James Stewart stars in it as George Bailey. And George Bailey is the all-American young man that is worked really hard for his family. He's excited to go to college, and he's the oldest of the siblings. He's always done a good job of taking care of his little brother. As a matter of fact, Harry, his little brother, one time fell through the ice, and what did George do? He saved his life. But he gets this really bad ear infection because of it, which hinders some of his future. George has always dreamed of travel. George has always dreamed of college and what's after college, and he wants to eat room service. He has aspirations. But it seems like he always gives up those aspirations in order to help someone else. As a matter of fact, right as he's about to head off to school, his father dies. And he becomes the operations guy, the leader of the Bailey, what is it called? The loans, right? He always was about helping everybody else. And it weighed on George because what he had done is he'd always thought about how to really live this life I really want to live this life. He had friends that really lived life, like Sam Wainwright, that tried to get him to buy into plastics right before the war. Y'all remember this guy that traveled and said, George, I always try to get you in on the ground floor. George always felt like he was left behind. Christmas Eve, Uncle Billy, who he also helped, loses $8,000. And what you saw is the end of the movie where the bank examiner says there's a discrepancy, there's a warrant for his arrest. They think that there's been fraud. Of course, George is in charge, and, well, he's going to have to pay the price. Just before this, he had come to the very end. I mean, he had really come to his breaking point. And Clarence Oddbody, his guardian angel, steps in and shows him what a difference that his life has made, not only with his wife Mary, but their whole community, Bedford Falls. I think maybe it's a time for us to reconsider and think about what a difference we've made. And maybe we need to really think about it truly is a wonderful life that God has called us to. For many, life is nothing more than the time spent between the dashes. You know what dash I'm speaking of, don't you? The dash that's in between the birth and your death. But I believe life is much more than just a dash. For many, it boils down to the amount of time until the end. But I believe that Jesus says, oh no, this is just practice for the time to come. So look in John 10 there. Jesus draws from a familiar scene. A shepherd is on the hillside keeping watch over his sheep. There in verse 10, he says this. Again, thank you, Ronnie, for reading for us earlier. The thief comes in to steal and kill and destroy. What's the job of the shepherd? To protect, to care for, to lead to water, to feed. But unfortunately, in their day, as in our day as well, there are thieves and there are robbers. They sought to take away the livelihood of Jewish shepherds. Likewise, there are many avenues which we travel down that lead to a life of destruction instead of a life of living. They attempt to destroy and steal life when Jesus always wanted to give life. And so this morning, what I want to do is, as we begin really, I want us to look at things that are destructive to our lives. The things that steal, like a thief, like a robber, the things that take away from us understanding. And if you'll allow me to let me be Clarence Oddbody for just a second, and let me show you how to live a life, or to remind you the life that you really have lived is wonderful. So here are some things that I believe attempts to steal life from us. Number one, you won't find the life in seeking pleasure. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 8 says this, the eye is not satisfied by seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. Many believe if I could live only a life of luxury, if I could win the lottery, if I could travel, if I could take cruises, if I could build a bigger house, you could fill in the blank. what they find is even though things may be nice, they seem to leave people empty. Try as they may to pursue pleasure, eventually the law of diminishing returns takes place. It takes a bigger thrill or a bigger event or another high, but it never lasts. Number two, you won't find life in performance. You know, George really believed if he just worked really, really hard, his time would come. If he just did the right things, if he said the right things, his time would come. After his little brother Harry went to college, he would take over for him. It would be his time. You know, I think even workaholics eventually realize that the satisfaction from one job completed is short-lived. The dash will only speak to what relationship you had on this earth at your funeral. It won't really speak to what you accomplished at work. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 8, man is always working and he's never satisfied. Not only will you not find it in your work, not only will you not find it in seeking pleasure, you're not going to find life in a position. George couldn't serve in the military. Remember we talked about how he saved his little brother, Harry, when he fell through the ice when they were young and he had a bad ear infection. And so George didn't get to go to the military. Harry did. What did Harry become? A war hero, right? He saved the lives of many on a transport. George got to stay home. And he got to go around and make sure everybody turned their lights off to conserve electricity. You won't find life in a position. Too often people think that if they receive a certain promotion or reach a certain status or even live in a certain area, then we'll be happy. Instead, they find that they still haven't found the secret to living. Life is still not fulfilled. I think it's interesting as we're looking at Ecclesiastes here that King Solomon, many claim the wealthiest man to ever live, maybe the second smartest man to ever live. I would argue Jesus being the first. He said this in chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, verses 2 and 4 through 4. Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. You won't find the life in a position. You won't find life in possessions, what you own. Sam Wainwright knew that, even though he owned a lot. But at the end of the money, he has a cable wired to Mary saying that my company will take care of the deficit. We're ready to make sure that George is okay. It had little to do with what George had that made him do that, but the kind of friend that George was. Have you guys realized this? Comparison comes from the devil. Have you noticed that? That comparison is a terrible thing. Now, I know that it's a semantic issue, right? Because you may say, oh, wait, Scott, there are ways that you can compare. It could be a good thing. But I'm talking about when we look at others and what they have and look at ourselves and what we don't have, that is simply from the devil, and it creates in us a dissatisfaction. It creates in us a mindset that God never wanted us to have. I can't help but think about those that receive talents from the master. What about if we don't look at what others have and we just can concentrate on the talents that we've been given and how we can use them for promoting the kingdom of this life and promoting this wonderful life that we live? And finally, not only will you not find it in possessions. By the way, let me read this, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. The one who loves money is never satisfied with money, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. The new wears off and buyer's remorse settles in. And finally, before we get to telling you what life really means, the last thing, you won't find life in just pursuits and staying busy. A lot of people just think, if I could just live this frantic lifestyle, if I just could keep up the intensity, if I could just. All of these things that I've mentioned today masquerade as givers of life. What they really are takers of life. So let me tell you what the source of life truly is. As Jesus does here in John chapter 10. Remember, he's talking to people that think they've got the answers, right? And Jesus says, no, you don't have the answers. You don't have it. You're the thief. You're the robber. What does he say there in verse 10 again? He says that he is the life. The truth is, life is not found in pleasure, performance, position, possessions, or pursuits. It's found in relationships. It's in relationship with Christ, the giver, the author of life. John chapter 11, verse 25 says, I am the resurrection and the life. In John 14:6, it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And again in chapter 10, verse 10, a thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it in abundance. Once we figure out what the source of life truly is, it allows us to understand the significance of how we live. How we can make this life truly a wonderful life. What did Clarence really do for George? Clarence really helped him understand what was really important. So let me help you understand what is really important. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things, God works for good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. I need you to know hard times can make it difficult to see God's purpose, especially when we're in the middle of pain or stress or loss. Many times we don't want to be reminded that God is working through our difficulties. But he is. He hasn't left us. He hasn't forsaken us. He walks alongside of us, and when we can't walk, he picks us up and he carries us. In the last scene of the movie, which we saw here, everyone that George has helped in the past comes back. They flock to his rescue because of the impact that he's had on their lives. They heard he was in trouble. And then my favorite piece is when he picks up that book. I believe it's Tom Sawyer. And it says this, the inscription written says this, and maybe you caught it as it was on the screen. Dear George, remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Thanks for the wings. Love, Clarence. If you really want to live life to the fullest, invest in relationships. If you really want to make this life a wonderful life, care for people. And what you'll find is you will mount up on wings like eagles, and you truly will live a wonderful life. If we can help you in any way, if we can help pray for you, if we can help you understand how God is working through the difficulties, if we can help ease your burden, that's what we want to do because we love you. And we see that this life is only temporary. There's something much bigger still to come. And we can't wait to live this life, this wonderful life with you through eternity. Come while we stand and sing.